going to be a very wonky talk as well, because this is not a question that you can answer with not a technical question. So this is really about policy and how you measure something like smartness and what smartness actually is, and whether it's even useful to do rankings, like Steve said, that are based on all sorts of different things and trying to apply the same kind of measures to different places. But nonetheless, about 5 years ago, back in 2014, I spent a good few months trying to answer this question: how smart is Sheffield? I was working on a project that was funded by Sheffield First and Sheffield Executive Partnership to try and do a first draft of what a smart strategy or smart statement would look like for Sheffield. I set up a room in the centre of town, and I invited people into it, and I interviewed them. These are people from some of the major utilities that work here, from the public sector, from the anchor institutions, researchers from universities, from the voluntary sector, startups, private sector companies, data companies. The first issue was to define what smart means. So we looked at formal definitions of this. We looked at what a bunch of other cities are doing, especially European cities. We particularly looked at where smart investment was being spent, so where research money that was being made available through the European Commission that was earmarked for smart city applications, what kind of projects they were being spent on. And we looked at 7 smart city ranking systems to see what they measured to get an understanding of what smart meant. We then interviewed these people about the challenges that they faced, not just the technical challenges, but the fundamental challenges they faced, and how they were using technology to solve them or not. What projects that they had tried in the past, what ones they were running currently, what ones that they were proposing to run, what their hopes and visions for the future were, and what their opinions were on this whole issue. And we summarised all of these responses, and we put them up on sticky walls around the room against a number of different domains in our framework, and allowed them to interact with things that other people had written about it. And it was really interesting to see people reflecting on their situation and being able to see the situation that other city institutions were in and what they were doing in such a visual way. And then we synthesised all of this into an identity statement for Sheffield. Like, what is Sheffield's identity when it comes to the application of technology to urban realms? We looked at some underlying themes that were coming through that seemed particularly strong in our city. We created a framework for evaluating this. We put together a roadmap of projects that were either already underway or planned for the future or suggested by people. And we made some recommendations for governance at city level. I won't go through this, but this is what the identity read like. It kind of reflected the tradition of innovation, urban innovation that Sheffield has. The key underpinning themes: inclusion was a really strong one, leadership, innovation, collaboration, use of data, and resilience, resilient communities, financial resilience, resilient data systems, having fallback mechanisms for technology. All of those things were part of that agenda. And we wrote about what these things meant, what they could mean in the context of city life, and particularly leadership. And part of this, the framework that we developed for this, a bit like the diagram that was shown earlier by Mark, showing the different kind of domains in which technology is applied in the city. Our framework had these 7 different smart domains and subdomains within each one, and we laid each out with subdomains inside, and then listed the key assets that we discovered, so what projects there were, what initiatives, what ideas people had, and what our resources were. And we tried to do this for as much as possible, bearing in mind that we knew all along that we were really only scratching the surface of what is out there. This is a large city. As all large cities, it has a huge amount of energy and activity, and it's mapping it is a big exercise, and not something you can do in a few months of having conversations with people. The roadmap that we produced contains some things that now are quite familiar to us. So the idea of creating a digital trade association. This has now become Sheffield Digital, which is a trade association for the digital industries in Sheffield, which I'm a co-founder of, and Mel is sitting over there as a co-founder. the Sheffield Urban Metabolism Observatory, SUMO as it was called then, which has now turned into the Urban Flows Observatory, is a huge success and has had a massive impact on the smartness of Sheffield, if you want to assess it that way. And there were some really good ideas that people put forward that are still in play. They're not realised yet, but these are still conversations that I hear relatively frequently. The idea of having a data commissioner for the city or some kind of city data office that is a single point where data sharing and data security and data protection is managed across all city data on behalf of citizens, for example. So from this work, we produced a report, and we then produced a summary of that report, and that summary contained 3 recommendations. The first one was to establish strong leadership on this agenda, the second one was to build a better connected ecosystem, and the third was to initiate where it's needed and to tell the narrative of that. So to create a program that looked at specific priorities in the city and channeled investment into them. A lot of this was around taking ownership of the agenda and making, communicating clearly to citizens, to other institutions in the city, and to potential investors and collaborators, internationally and internationally, what Sheffield wanted from these relationships, what Sheffield wanted technology to be used for. That's such an important thing that we tried to stress. Anyway, on the back of that work in 2016, Huawei produced their first UK Smart Cities report, and Sheffield ranked 10 as a challenger city. It got on the map. It was considered to be one of the smartest cities in the UK in their index, partly because of some of the work that they were able to discover through the work of the report that we'd done, but not least because there was so much stuff actually going on. By 2017, with none of the recommendations that we made in the report actually realised, we'd fallen to 16th. The year after, Huawei stopped doing this report. Nobody really does these reports anymore. Huawei certainly doesn't really do anything like that anymore. Most of the rankings in this area are either global, using existing data sets, or they're much more narrowly defined around things like sustainability or connectivity or economic development. They're no longer looking holistically at what we consider the smart city to consist of. In our definition, it wasn't just the technology in a particular area. It wasn't just the ability to manage a city. It was about the application of the technologies and methods of the digital revolution to improve people's lives in cities. That's really the definition that we chose. And it got cited in a number of academic papers around, particularly for its holistic view of what the smart city should be. Nobody really looks at things that universally anymore. And there's no universally accepted way to measure these things, so it doesn't really happen. And also, there's been a trend recently to not look at things from a kind of instrumental point of view, but to look at things from a perception point of view. So the IMD study earlier this year, for example, it ranked 102 global cities by choosing a small number of residents in each city and asking them questions about how they perceive their own city. So this is really about perception. It's not about using any independent measure that you can compare across cities. And London came out 20th in this, which in virtually every other smart or smart-related study that is done, it's either first, second, or third. But in this it came out 20th, Birmingham came out 52nd, there were no other British cities on this. But how would Sheffield fare? I would suspect that Sheffield wouldn't fare very well at all, because I don't think the general population really have any conception of what Sheffield's ambition is in this area, or what its strategy is. So what has happened since 2015, since this report came out? The ecosystem has really greatly expanded. There's a lot more going on, a lot more things have been established, a lot of things off that roadmap are actually realised now. They've actually gained life. They came to pass. We've got one of the, or if not the densest air quality sensor network in the country. largely through the activity of citizen scientists. We've got one of the densest public Wi-Fi infrastructures in the country, probably in Europe. We've got these great assets like the new Advanced Wellbeing Research Centre and Lab for Living that's just been given a new lease of life over at Hallam. We've got the City Council now has a connectivity strategy, which it never had before. We have, it's funny, and there's lots of meetups. And there's also now a means of curating it. So we helped the council establish .Chef a couple of years ago, which is essentially a community of digital leaders across the city that try to keep track of what's going on in each of these domains. And the idea was that if we knew what was going on in each of these domains, we could also self-assess and say, well, we think we're doing quite well in this area, but not so well in other areas, we can make interventions. It also provides a way of sharing information about what's going on across the ecosystem in each of these domains using publicly accessible Trello boards. And it's had a very positive effect in a lot of ways. It hosted a conference in 2017. It was nominated for the Digital Leaders Award. Last year, it led the 5G funding bid on behalf of the city. But it's also lacking in others. It hasn't been able to sustain traction. It hasn't, the website's out of date now, it hasn't been designed around engagement. There's a lot more that could be done to get more people involved in supporting the ecosystem using this tool. So what needs to happen? The city needs to commit strategically to this, and it needs to have an overarching multi-stakeholder digital development strategy under which their specific strategies can sit. This is a big topic, as I said, this is more than a 10-minute talk. It needs to have a set of strategic priorities, which it is now developing. It has a plan for 5 and 5. So that's 5 major city challenges that it aims to do something about within 5 years. And it has to engage a broad ecosystem. It has to do that via .Chef is the best way of doing that. It needs to get anchor institution, private equity to invest in doing this. It needs to lead and engage this by appointing someone who can be the point person and actually drive this process. It can't call it smart because nobody likes that term, nobody understands it, but it needs to use words like digital development, regeneration, connectedness, adapting to or accommodating digital technology, city innovation, upholding citizens' digital rights. These terms, the terms that resonate better, that people can understand more. And then it needs to use this structure creatively to create more innovation, to solve problems proactively and in combination. It needs to attract external startups and investors to try and create solutions for some of these things and bring consortia together to draw down public funds to invest and create new value. So how smart is Sheffield after all of this? Which is the question that I was trying to answer when I put this together. I'd say it's much smarter than it was, even when it was ranked number 10 in the UK. But it's still far from as smart as it could be, and what's needed is leadership and a renewed commitment to what already exists. There's still a lot we can do to curate the ecosystem and lobby for that commitment. We don't need to sit and wait. Please get in touch if you'd like to help out. Thank you.